Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back on pre-season testing, but also looking ahead to the season opening Australian Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by the awesome duo. It is, of course, 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Coop. I don't know why I've done that. And, of course,
and
the man, the myth.
Again,
the legend, the peace sign, me becoming a ring announcer. It's lead editor Ian Parks, everybody. Guys, that's a great way to start the show. Ian, I'll come to you first because, of course, you were in Bahrain last week. Have you fully recovered yet from the rain in Bahrain?
The rain in Bahrain? I don't think it's much the rain in Bahrain. It was the fact that the flights I came back on were scheduled at the most ridiculous time. But it was a choice I made for certain particular reasons, and I ended up getting to bed on Saturday night, which I think then at that point was about 40 hours without sleep. So I've pretty much recovered. As I say, it was my own choice for those flights. I just wanted to get back home, to be fair, and sometimes you got to pick very unfavorable, uncomfortable flights. Unfortunately, the airline I also chose was not one of the best, but I won't give them a shout out.
No, we won't give them a shout out.
It wasn't Ryanair.
They don't deserve a shout out.
Ryanair doesn't go to Bahrain anyway. So
they do not. I mean, you never, that could be a travel route coming to Ryanair soon. Who knows? Maybe. Yeah. Sam, I mean, it's still confusing me. I'm struggling to get my head around the fact that we had to report on rain in Bahrain. We had to report on a circuit-wide power cut. We had to report on a bus almost being on the circuit. We also had to report on shattered glass on the start-finish straight. I mean, it was a bit of a bonkers week, wasn't it?
It was totally bizarre. It was just, bad luck or good luck. People say these things come in threes, and we had those. We had excluding the rain. Excluding the rain.
Well, the rain in Bahrain, that time of year.
It sounds nice.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's I mean, how many Bahrain jokes did you see on social media?
Too many.
Exactly. If I had £1 for every one that I saw, probably wouldn't have a mortgage anymore. But anyway. It was an interesting few days. I wouldn't do that though. I enjoy this. We're in a privileged
position. My boss will be so happy.
No, but I think you guys will agree that we're in a privileged position of having a job in which is very much a hobby as well.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
It's combining work and a love and a passion. So anyway, enough on that. Yeah, the season really intriguing few days in Bahrain. So, very much looking forward to getting into the discussion about it.
A hobby which also involves us normally taking the mickey out of ourselves, which we will do in a second, most notably at myself. But very quickly, for those who are listening or watching this episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, we have a very big announcement coming up halfway through the show. So make sure you are watching till halfway, then turn off. But if you can watch the entire thing, thank you very much, because also at the end, we are starting something brand new for our podcast. It could be a car crash. It could go very, very well. The only way to find out is by tuning in every single week. Now, we've got to start with our bold predictions from preseason testing, because, of course, I asked you two which team you thought would complete the most laps and which team you thought would complete the least laps. Now, I did so well in predicting that Red Bull would complete the most laps. They, of course, actually completed the least laps with 304. I said the least laps would be Ferrari. They actually completed the sixth most. Sam, you actually did not too bad, my friend, because you predicted that, like in 2024, Haas would complete the most laps. They were one short. They completed the second most. You said McLaren would complete the least. They completed the seventh most. The winner of this bold predictions from testing is Mr. Ian Parks, because Ian, you correctly said that Mercedes would complete the most laps, which they did. You also said Williams would complete the least. They actually did the fifth most. So round of applause for Ian Parks, everybody. Sam looks like he has something to say.
I was more upset than Ollie Behrman when his engine cover came flying off. That is ultimately what did it, isn't it? Let's face it.
In fairness, I don't think anybody would have dared to suggest or dared to predict that Red Bull would have finished bottom of the lap chart.
No.
I mean,
definitely. I mean, they completed, if I do quick maths, they completed 154 laps fewer than Mercedes. a lot. But on the topic,
right.
3 full Bahrain Grand Prix, or
it is roughly.
Yeah.
But on that topic, though, this leads very nicely into this week's question to kick things off. How many laps did all the teams combined complete in preseason testing? Closest wins. And the stress begins.
Yeah, I know, because then you got to start thinking about it. Then you start doing multiplications.
I know what the answer, so I'm fine.
Yeah, I know. I gotta.
Sam's gone silent. His heads are in his hand.
He's go for 3,897.
I'm going to go for 3,300.
That's a mile short.
Sam, you are a mile short.
Yeah.
Ian,
I
tell you what. We have a little private joke in our Slack. In our Slack channels at work, we have a private joke that Ian is, the headline king, so we quite often will use the crown emoji. I think we need to start using the crown emoji in our podcast because, Ian, the correct answer was 3,896. You're one lap off. That's mental.
I promise you, folks, anybody listening or watching, I had no idea. That was a genuine guess. I had not counted up the laps in advance of this.
I am stunned.
This is experience.
I'm in disbelief. This is experience calling. This is also peak maths predictions. I think you need to be watching Ian's predictions now at the end of this episode for Australia. So that's something you all need to look out for because, get your lottery ticket numbers ready because Ian Parks is the man who's going to make us a lot of money at this rate. For that, Ian, your prize, you can go first. What was your biggest takeaway from preseason testing?
I
can't get over that.
No, just in general, I think for me, the improvement of Williams.
Yeah.
Yes, I know much and to a certain extent as well, the struggle of Red Bull, which we will get onto, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But for me, McLaren looked strong. We knew that because they finished as Constructors' Champions last season, despite the fact they've come into this season with a revamped car. But they'd started on that car so early that they kind of were always going to hit the ground running in preseason this year. Ferrari looked quite strong. Lewis feeling seemingly very comfortable in that car, making quite a statement himself by turning around and saying that it's the best he's felt in preseason for a number of years. So that was something. As I say, we'll get onto Red Bull a little bit more in a few moments. But for me, Williams, I felt, appeared to have taken the biggest step if we're looking in terms of overall performance. They were kind of downplaying it a little bit when they revealed their car at Silverstone on February the 14th, kind of suggesting that they weren't going to be in the mix, that they might struggle a little bit this year. But if that indicates a struggle, then boy, watch out. Because yes, Carlos Sainz set the fastest time overall. Read into that what you will, but he set the overall fastest lap time in a car in which he described himself as lost. If that's Carlos being lost in a car in which he's still struggling to ascertain the best setup, how to get the best out of the tyres, bearing in mind the conditions were not what we come to expect from Bahrain as well. Temperature way down by about 12, 13, 14 degrees around that circuit as well, which of course, as we know, is super rough tarmac. It's never been resurfaced as far as I can recall in its history. So therefore it's lent itself now to this quite abrasive surface. So for me, bottom line, Williams look a good, I'd say, top 10 contender for points. As to how far into that top 10, not quite sure, but certainly they seem to have taken that leap from where they were at the back end of last year to potentially now being the 5th best team if we're still going to take the top 4 as the top 4, despite these uncertainties around Red Bull at the moment.
And of course, we will go through who in our pecking order in terms of the teams looking ahead to the season based on testing in a little while. But I think for me, my biggest takeaway was, I think McLaren do seem to have not a big edge, maybe a small advantage. For me, it's still, I think there's so much uncertainty over who is then the second best team. Is it Ferrari? Is it Mercedes? Is it Red Bull? Because those three all look like they could be come the first race and the first few rounds very, very close. And I think that's where it's going to be so difficult to predict. Sam, for you, what was your biggest takeaway from testing?
Well, I feel similarly about the midfield. I think Ian's absolutely right. Williams have made a big step quite clearly from what we can see so far, the biggest individual step from any one team. But we have this kind of two-tier system or two-tier grid at the moment. The top four have obviously all converged, but the midfield look like they have, maybe aside from Racing Balls and Stake, and maybe at the bottom have kind of slipped back slightly, or Stake have kind of stayed where they are. But Haas, difficult to kind of get a true reading on them, given how many laps they did.
No fast laps.
At 6 seconds off possible pace. But it feels like Aston Martin have slipped back into that group with Williams and Alpine stepping up. That I feel that you've got a nice kind of chunk there of teams that are going to be fighting out at the tail end of the points. So there's convergences in the kind of separate little groups that we have on the grid. So that was my biggest take home, was that all those teams are very, very tightly clasped together.
Something
that was, I was going to say, mate, just to quickly add on this point, that was really weird from Haas. I mean, I know they're not obliged to go for a fast lap, but at least give yourselves an indication as to where that car is, where it might be in qualifying on Saturday. I mean, Ayao Komatsu was playing it down to a certain extent when we chatted to him at the end of testing. But as I say, I just thought it's a little bit strange. As I say, you're at least going to give yourself a bit of an indicator as to just how good that car is at low fuel, on the quickest set of tires as well. So anyway,
they did it last year as well
on Saturday,
didn't they? They just were so focused on long running pace last year because obviously in 2023 they had massive problems with tire degradation and keeping that pace throughout the race. That obviously they felt they really need to focus on it. So I think it is strange that they didn't kind of progress from that this year, that they had a very similar plan for a second year in a row.
It'll be very interesting to find out when the season gets underway, and I'm sure Haas's test plan comes up in discussion, why they went for that. Is it that they're just actually very confident already in their one-lap pace? Is it because they are concerned about their race pace? I think that's something that we'll probably be able to tell based on the first few qualifying sessions and races of the season. But based on all of our biggest takeaways, the overriding consensus is obviously that McLaren do appear to be at the top and at least the early favourites. What was interesting listening, of course, to the commentary during testing was that Bernie Collins, of course, former Aston Martin strategist, said that McLaren's race simulations were basically 0.4 of a second per lap quicker than Mercedes. And of course, George Russell was consistently towards the top of the timesheets. But it does look, Ian, that going into the season, it's McLaren's to lose going into it. And they are the team who, early to say, but they are the team entering the year on the top of the tree.
No, I wouldn't go that far. It's saying it's McLaren's to lose. Yes, they did have really good, solid 3 days, but the conditions were so anomalous. I mean, they were cold. I mean, those once the sun started to dip, it was chilly. It was really chilly. As I said to a few people there, actually, because I looked at the weather forecast when we were there for this week, the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week, and it's more representative of what you would expect. Blanket sunshine, temperatures on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of 26, 26 and 28 respectively. So that's what we should have experienced in Bahrain. Then we had 13 and 14. And then there was a wind chill factor to take into consideration when the wind did decide to blow.
And
then, of course, as I mentioned, and it rained. Let's not forget that. We'll add that in. Rain in Bahrain. Nick's loving that one today. And, of course, we got really a circuit that is not very representative of the majority of circuits across the calendar, because the majority of circuits have, by and large, been resurfaced. They're much, much smoother. And it was a point that I'm not just making. It was a point that was made by a number of drivers, a number of the team principals when they were asked about it as well, that those conditions were wholly unrepresentative of what we can expect at the majority of Grand Prix over the course of this season. So, yes, I appreciate the conditions were the same for everyone, and McLaren were the team that appeared to be ahead of everyone over those conditions. If they can replicate that at the upcoming Grand Prix in Australia, China, Japan, the first three, for argument's sake, before we even get back to Bahrain as the fourth race in mid-April, then I think we can comfortably say that, bearing in mind the development that's going to take place over the course of the season on these cars going into 2026 is going to be quite limited, then at that stage we can arguably look at it and think this looks pretty good for McLaren, and whichever of its two drivers could be ahead in the Drivers' Championship after those first three stages. But I'm not going to read too much into it. It's always the case, and we always know, folks, bottom line is the qualifying times on Saturday at Melbourne's Albert Park. That's going to be our real true indicator, and then we go from there.
Because obviously a lot of people based just on testing are saying that McLaren are the favourites for the Constructors' title. A lot of people have said that Lando Norris is probably the favourite for the Drivers' title rather than Oscar. Sam, Ian obviously rightly points out that, the Bahrain International Circuit is so different to, almost every track on the calendar. None more so perhaps than Albert Park. It couldn't be more different. Do you think McLaren head into the season, does this increase the pressure, actually decrease it, them knowing that compared to 12 months ago, where they had a good car, not the best car, that the odds are they have probably got the best car on the grid, and that, realistically, they should be up the sharp end for the first round? Do you think they'll feel more pressure now because of that they maybe have some expectation they've got to fulfill?
I honestly don't think they will, because they've vanquished the demons of an extended championship drought, whereas Ferrari haven't. Ferrari have that pressure of, we've got 1 year before a complete regulations overhaul. We are in position to go for a title. We have to go now because we don't know how the pitch is going to look a year from now. So I think Ferrari are under more pressure. There's more anticipation, and therefore probably more likely they are going to make mistakes. And we've seen in the past, maybe not so under the Fred Vasseur kind of era, but Ferrari do, in the heat of the moment, make those errors, pit stop strategy, pit stops themselves, so on and so forth. For McLaren, I think they will feel pretty confident, and I completely agree with Ian in terms of it's very early to tell how things are going to shake out. Bahrain is an anomaly, particularly because it's almost entirely mid-speed corners. There's a couple of slow speeds and one high-speed corner, but it's not representative of what you're getting over the course of the calendar. Lots of people have based it almost entirely on the fact that McLaren have never really had a great time in Bahrain. So the fact they've looked strong must, but again, the anomalies. Take Mercedes. You'd expect them to look really good in cold conditions, and they didn't set themselves apart. You mentioned, the 0.4 gap on long run pace. So I think McLaren are going to feel pretty comfortable where they are. They know that it's just kind of moving the needle forward from where they were last year. And they also know that under these current regulations, they've consistently, accurately piled on downforce and upgrades to their car without taking steps back. Whereas other teams, Aston Martin, Red Bull, Ferrari have not been able to do that.
On the topic of looking back at McLaren and looking ahead to our next discussion, Red Bull, I think it's time to make our big announcement. The Racing News 365 podcast will be joined next week by 13-time Formula One race winner David Coulthard. Make sure you tune in for that, because it is an episode you will not want to miss. Very, very exciting stuff. And of course, he is a former McLaren driver, former Red Bull driver, Formula Williams driver. So let's discuss Red Bull next, because, a very difficult test. They kind of, a lot of questions were asked about Red Bull going into the test because of what happened in the latter stages of last year in regard to the RB20. But they faced issues on the Thursday with a loss of engine water pressure. On the Friday, they lost time due to an oil leak, set the least laps, should I say. Ian, it's obviously not the situation Red Bull want to be in going into the first round. But obviously there is, and something I think we're going to discuss a lot this year, this major regulations change next year. Under the impression that Red Bull do have things they need to solve with their new car, how long do you think they will allow themselves to work on fixing the RB21 before they switch that focus to next year? Because, of course, 2026, as we mentioned last week, is massive for Red Bull, because it's not just a new regulation change for them. For them, it's becoming an OEM. It's becoming a factory outfit. It's a really big time for Red Bull.
It's huge time for Red Bull, as you're saying it, because of everything that's on the line for them in 2026. As you mentioned, the overriding factor there is the fact that it's developing its own power unit with Red Bull powertrains, of course. Technical partnership with Ford, which will be hugely significant and important for them. It's going to help them develop that power unit. But yes, so much resource has gone into that system already. And of course, it's only going to be trying to develop and progress it even further over the course of these next few months before it gets a better picture as to how it's going to look inside the RB22, should we already call it, what it's going to be next year's car. Might be something different with its own power unit side, who knows? But
good point.
Red Bull has always been true to its tradition of adding a number on. So I'm going to say it's going to be RB22. But huge season this year, and in terms of going into 26. And how long before they call it? I even call it after qualifying in Australia. Let's see where that car pitches up. I mean, don't take our word for it, folks. Take the word of the technical director, Pierre Vacher. And he did a couple of interviews over the Bahrain test last week. Quotes have slowly started to emerge over the past few days. And the bottom line from him, one of the quotes I've read, he said, basically, we're not quick enough. So this is Red Bull's technical director saying straight away, never mind that they didn't do enough laps. They finished bottom of the lap count chart. He's also stating they're not quick enough. So they've got a couple of weeks to, well, less than that now, of course, but actually, a week or so to try and improve on that. Maybe the conditions at Albert Park might help the car a degree because, we're talking about much warmer temperatures. But you've got to think that in a year where we know the changeover is going to come sooner rather than later for a lot of teams, if it's not in that mix, and in particular for Red Bull, you've got to wonder if its car is not in that mix at Melbourne's Albert Park, just how long does it give it before it then decides to say, do you know what, folks, it's not going to be our year this year with the RB21. We've really got to focus, place all our eggs in one basket on 26. In fairness, it's a dilemma that's facing every single team up and down the grid. It's not just Red Bull, but of course, there is going to be a lot of focus on Red Bull because Max comes into it as the 4-time consecutive champion. Red Bull, of course, we know could have won last year's Constructors' Championship, but for the dire performance of Sergio Perez, got Liam Lawson now in the car alongside Max Verstappen. So there's still a lot at stake for that. They're not, let's put it this way, they're not going to throw in the towel easily and readily. They are going to give it as big a push as they possibly can for as long as they possibly can until it comes to a point, as I say, where it's like, we've done all we can. We've really got to go for 26 now.
What was interesting, Sam, obviously during testing was on the onboard, whilst Max over one lap, it looked quite sharp. For the long runs, it was quite clear that, he looked unsettled. A lot of work on the steering wheel when they were showing the onboard footage, and obviously he had his spin as well at the end of the final day, as did another driver. I can't quite remember who at the moment, but obviously, as Ian mentioned, Max enters this year as, not only a defending world champion, a defending 4-time world champion, having won 4 on the bounce, can do something remarkable this year if he were to claim a 5th in a row. But what's interesting is you saw in the press conference that, Max was quite playful, quite jokey. There's obviously been a lot going on around him in regard to the FIA and the swearing and whatnot. What Max Verstappen do you think we're going to get in 2025, given that it seems that he's going to have a car, at least for the start of the season, which might not be up to his standards?
I think regardless of what kind of outward demeanor we get from Max, because we do see different Maxes kind of in these settings, especially media settings, I think the one consistency that we've always had is that he is always pretty much the same when it comes to being on track. Even last year, when the car's performance was falling away, he was still putting in really strong results for where the car was, maximizing on what he could. Even when there's all these, I think Hungary, it was a pretty messy weekend for him. If you look back at that, he made a mistake trying to, battling with Lewis Hamilton. But generally, he's pretty consistent. So I think what we're going to get is a driver who is really wanting that 5th record-matching consecutive title. Obviously, Michael Schumacher went 5 consecutive with Ferrari in the early 2000s. So that's a big mark that Max will be looking at. What's difficult then for Red Bull is they have to acquiesce with, if things aren't looking good, at what point do we have to call it? Potentially against Max's wishes. He's going to want to get that championship trophy, of course, but the team will know that longer term, are they maybe at some point better suited turning their focus to 2026 and beyond? And in extension of that, potentially shoring up keeping Max Verstappen in the long term. Because if they get to 2026 and things are not going well, his eye will start to go, he's like, I've got 4 years of this regulation set. Aston Martin are looking pretty good right now. So that's something that Red Bull have to really kind of grapple with over the early part of the season. But I think we're going to have a highly motivated Max, I think in large part because he is not the bookmakers' championship favourite. It's an interesting and a new position for him to be in under these current regulations. Obviously, 2021, different story, different cars. But he has had his way almost completely since the contemporary ground effect era came in. So it's a very different proposition for him. So I think he's going to be really up for the fight.
And what's interesting as well, you mentioned, I see, Max might start looking elsewhere. One of the teams that, was looking at him was, of course, Mercedes, and in particular, Toto Wolff, who we know is a very big Max fan. George Russell, though, was very, very positive about Mercedes' performance in testing, called it a seamless test. It feels like in a little bit that, Mercedes have perhaps left their best in this current regulations to the very end. And it also feels like that, they've used the term, new chapter a lot because Lewis has gone and Kimi's come in. It also feels that Mercedes feel like they have something to prove. They want to almost prove to Lewis, perhaps, you should not have left us. We are in a good place. And it does feel, even when you look at, of course, they've now got Adidas as their kit sponsor, which is taking some time to get used to. But it's these little things which it really paints quite a new picture for Mercedes, it feels.
Yeah, it's a different era for that team without Lewis. Lewis was part of the furniture, as we all know, for many seasons.
Yeah.
And now he's gone. And it's like, it's just got to move on. Got to move on. They can't think of all that success that they had with Lewis. They've got to, they've had 3 tough years under this current regulation set. And now it's time to really pitch in, do whatever it can to end this regulation set on a high. I remember some quotes from Toto at the end of last season when the team principals were being asked about, the balance between 25 and 26 and what his thoughts were. And yes, quite obviously, he turned around and said that there has to be that balance. But he actually plucked a quote from his good friend, Nicky Lauda, the late Nicky Lauda, of course, 3-time F1 champion, but of course the former non-executive chairman of Mercedes. And apparently at some point during Nicky's career, whatever stage it was, Nicky was asked, would you like to win this year's title or next? And Nicky just apparently looked at the interview and went, both. So that's the mindset that, but that's the mindset right. Mercedes are carrying.
Yeah.
It's the mindset Mercedes are carrying into this season. They see it as an opportunity because, if they've managed to do something with that car, with the fact that Lewis is no longer there and they're no longer trying to tailor-make that car towards Lewis anymore and correct the gremlins that he was encountering, and now they've got a car that will both suit George and potentially Kimi, then does that allow it greater scope to produce a title-challenging performance this season? Make no mistake, if Mercedes is in the hunt over these first 2, 3, 4 Grand Prix, it will be going all out to secure both titles.
On the topic of Lewis, obviously mentioned a couple of times, Sam, Ferrari perhaps the team who the word sandbagging was probably used the most towards Ferrari because they kind of just kept to their own business, really, got their plan done. Of course, it did look like they had some issues with Lewis at the end of Friday, which obviously lost him the final 45 minutes of running. But Ferrari kind of kept themselves pretty quiet. No outstanding lap times, just plugging away, obviously, at their testing plan. But what was most interesting is that coming out of preseason testing, the biggest thing based on Ferrari seemed to be some of the quotes from Lewis to various, obviously, media outlets. And I mean, it's fair to say that Lewis Hamilton is very motivated this season. He's obviously in quite a punchy mood as well, in particular, some of his remarks in Time magazine to Toto Wolff. But it feels like Lewis is kind of showing a side of himself, which he maybe lost in the last few years at Mercedes, this kind of, I'm ready for the fight, bring it on kind of thing. I can do this still, that kind of energy.
It's a sense of renewal, I think, for Lewis. It's this new challenge that he gets to get stuck into. And you saw that, I think the Time article perfectly illustrates that. He was saying how he commissioned it. It was his idea. And he's really taking this whole episode of his career on and saying, this is it. This is, this might not be where I get the most success, but it could be the seminal final chapter in my career in which people go, oh, do you remember Lewis Hamilton, the Ferrari driver? That's, I think, how he's kind of looking at it, which is odd in the sense that he obviously won 6 drivers' titles and 14 championships in total with Mercedes. But I think for him, there is this sense that there's this kind of renaissance of this, he's very rejuvenated. Because, he's talking about how, he, even though he doesn't like testing, he's been really thankful for the previous cars days. And he's sounding very positive about the Ferrari, even though we don't, it's very difficult to kind of paint a picture of Ferrari. There's lots of contradictory quotes and kind of information coming out. Some people think they're sandbagging, as you mentioned. Some people are saying, they actually maybe don't look like they've quite got to terms with some of the issues that they had last season, and they're still maybe not quite where they want to be. So Lewis being very positive cut against that kind of very kind of opaque situation with how well they will perform when we get to Australia, I think just shows mentally what a good place he is now in, because he's, full eyes forward, both eyes fully forward, and he's ready to go. And I think that is when we see the best version of Lewis, and he is in a position to get the best out of himself at the moment.
And I think if there's one thing I've learned about Lewis as well over the years, is that, in particular, as he's matured, he doesn't really pull the wool over people's eyes with his comments anymore. I think if he'd have come out of testing suggesting that the car wasn't where he wanted it to be yet, then I think we would have got that from him. They might have come out and said, there's still a bit of work to do. We're working towards optimizing those kind of comments, but we didn't get that. We got, as Sam has just pointed out, quite positive Lewis. And as I mentioned to you in one of our updates after one of the days of testing, Ferrari has changed its front suspension concept for this year, which is quite a radical change for any team, bearing in mind it has used one particular type of suspension. It's gone from a push to a pull at the front, and it now mirrors what's on the back. And the suggestion is that in doing that, it has given Lewis a car in which he can be more aggressive, attacking the corners, and predominantly as well, not only being able to attack the corner going into it, but accelerate more quickly coming out of it. Because that's where that was one of Lewis's fortes, one of his strengths, when he was so dominant at Mercedes, that he had a car that could do that. And that's obviously led to him gathering all those pole positions under his belt and becoming the record holder in that field. Since we've come into this new era, he's really, really struggled with the type of car that he's been given, because it's not allowed him that aggressiveness into and out of the corner. So his comment that it's the best he has felt for quite some time in pre-season testing, I thought was quite pertinent.
One driver I do want to discuss, because, bless you, Ian. Before I get in, one driver I do want to discuss, because, he came out with some very interesting quotes in regard to feeling lost. And it is, of course, Carlos Sainz, who obviously was the fastest driver, set the fastest lap across the test on Thursday. And it's interesting, Sam, because for him to come out and say he's lost, having set the fastest lap across the test, it gives off very mixed messages, because obviously Andreas Seller, the McLaren team principal, saying that, Williams could potentially make the top 4 a top 5. They're looking really, really strong. For Carlos to have set the fastest lap, then to have come out with those quotes that he's feeling lost, it either shows in my eyes that perhaps maybe Carlos is pulling a funny and is trying not to give away Williams the secret that they're in a good place, or maybe actually perhaps they aren't in the best of places going into the season and need some work. It's a funny one, isn't it?
It is strange, but like Lewis, Carlos is quite a straight shooter. He will tell you how it is, and he'll be honest. And even at the time when he made those remarks, Alex Jakes on commentary was thanked him for how honest he had been. And I think my take home was that if you're a midfield competitor or even Alex Albon, beware, because this is a driver who tops testing, yes, and we know all the various caveats that go with topping testing and looking good. Pierre Gasly had a brilliant final session, but the Alpine was probably on pretty low fuel.
And rain in Bahrain.
And rain. Yeah, as we said.
Drop it now.
You know what? I just want to see it again. Imagine we have a wet qualifying in Bahrain. It won't happen. It'll probably be like 35 degrees or something stupid. But
I'm looking forward to Nick just booking annual leave so he can go to Bahrain in the middle of winter to try and experience it firsthand. But anyway, with Carlos, he was essentially saying that I don't know where I can find that extra time at this stage. Is it on corner entry? Is it on exit? Is it something else that I need to be doing? But essentially, yeah, I'm a little bit lost because I don't know where that little bit extra, those final 2-3 tenths come from. That's where I am at the moment. So whilst things look good, it potentially isn't a representative picture of where I will be after the first few rounds. And that's what I need to focus on in those opening races. So as I say, if you're Alex Albon, if you're, Alpine, Haas, whoever, you should potentially be a little bit scared because this is a driver who's come in. He's also been very honest with, don't expect podiums or, top 5 finishes, but the aim absolutely for Melbourne has to be points. But I also didn't join this team to be a midfield also-ran. I'm here to win and help bring the team back up. So you've got another very motivated driver who is clearly performing quite well and is maybe not completely showing everything he will be capable of after the first few rounds of the season. So yeah, as I say, beware.
On that note, it is time for Racing News 365's ranking of the pecking order going into the 2025 Formula One season and the season opening Australian Grand Prix. So what myself, Nick Golding, Sam, Absolutely Coop, and lead editor Ian Parks are going to do is state who we believe the 10th team to the first team are in the pecking order going into the new season. Obviously, majority vote rules, as I imagine we're going to have widely different opinions. You never know, maybe we'll all think the exact same, and this will just be a very quick 5-minute segment. But let's kick things off in 10th, and I think we can probably all agree, Steak F1. Yeah, I'm struggling.
Free steaks, please.
No real changeover from last year. I can't see it, to be honest.
Steak. Okay, nice and easy. 9th, I think Racing Bulls.
Yeah.
Oh, Sam agrees. So that's 2-1. Well, that's 2 regardless. Ian.
Oh, Ian's about to throw a spanner.
No, it's they didn't really pull up any trees, did they? In testing,
they did not.
They were a really difficult team to.
They didn't plant any trees either.
With. No.
But also, watching the car looked very. It didn't look particularly compliant. It looks a bit of a
livery
handful.
by a mile. So I hope they do improve because I want it to have lots of air time because I think it looks amazing. So okay, so Ian, who would you say then in 9th? Because you seem a bit skeptical.
No. I was just trying to. Yeah, okay. I agree. I agree with Racing.
Trying to make this a bit more.
So 10th Steak, 9th Racing Bulls. We're doing quite well. 8th, and this is where I think it could get interesting. Aston Martin for me.
Ooh.
I'm really not convinced.
I struggle to see how they've fallen that far, but
well,
I think I don't think 8th is on wholly unfair. If you'd given Aston 9th, I would have been like, it's steady on.
Okay, all right. So so who would you say?
Is tight.
Who would you say, Sam? Then who would you say for 8th?
For me, Haas.
Interesting.
Okay, Ian.
I'm going to agree with you, Nick. I wasn't. I wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced by Aston Martin at all. I mean, it was a team that struggled over pretty much the entirety of last season. Okay, finished fifth in the Constructors' Championship, but its total number of points was a catastrophic drop from the season before when it was also fifth.
Yeah.
And I just think they've got more of their eyes set on 2026 than this season.
Yeah,
I think they
know I agree.
Where that car was coming out of 25, really struggling with it. For me, yes, well, obviously going to try and do what they can with this 25 car. Then I think, as I say, they've got their sights set on 26, and I don't see them doing too much at all. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were lining up somewhere around the 13th, 14th, 15th position in Melbourne. And for me, they did look like the 8th team in Bahrain.
At least the positive for them is obviously we're recording this on Monday, the 3rd of March, and Adrian Newey has officially started at Aston Martin.
Yes.
So congrats, Adrian.
Luck,
enjoy your new job. He needs the luck, I think, of where Aston Martin currently are. So, okay, so Stake 10th, Racing Bulls 9th, Aston Martin 8th. Sorry, Sam, which I think 7th. For me, it's Haas then. That's where Haas slot in for me.
Yeah.
Sam?
I would have gone Aston in this slot.
Okay.
So I think, while slightly different, we're all pretty much on the same page, or at least in the same chapter. So Haas.
Oh, yeah. Ian?
Yeah, it's hard to move away from that, in all honesty, because...
Painting a good picture here. Look at this.
We're not painting a bad picture, are we? But
it's amazing.
The only thing that we haven't covered for them, and we don't know, is it's one lap pace. Where does that car sit?
In fairness,
because they set 457 race laps.
It's not that we haven't covered it; it's that they haven't covered it. There was a massive hole in their run plan.
Got to be a reason, I guess. We'll find out. Okay, so this is going very, very well. 6th, Alpine for me. Is this where we're going to differ? Ian, I'll push you first. Who do you think 6th? Do you agree with me and Alpine?
Yes, I think so. Okay. Again, another really difficult team to thoroughly judge. But I think they came out of last season in a good position. I sensed a degree of optimism from them, speaking to various people over the course of the test. I got a good sense that they feel they're in a good place with that car. Certainly, they are a million miles removed from where that car was 12 months ago in testing, which literally was nowhere or at the back of the grid. Comfortable 10th last year.
Heavy car.
This time around, they do look in a reasonable position, and I think they might, on occasion, surprise a few people. But at the moment, coming out of testing, I'd go, Alpine in that position.
Sam, you agreeing? Alpine in 6th?
I am agreeing.
Look at this. This is all too nice.
Williams have obviously taken a step, as have Alpine.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the best of Alpine was Pierre Gasly, as I mentioned, on those, what looks like low fuel runs.
Yeah.
So I think it maybe has inflated where they potentially are slightly. So I think, 6th, I think it's a fair read on them.
Which makes 5th quite easy, because I'm assuming we're all in accordance. Williams? Yeah. Oh, Ian's?
Stop it. No way. You're not.
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
This is outrageous.
All right, here we go. Where's Ian going? Feeling brave.
I can't help wonder just how poor Red Bull might be, because, Max came out of the test and he wasn't particularly happy. He said there's work to do. Pierre Vacher, the technical director, as we touched on earlier in this podcast, said they are not the quickest car. And I'm just wondering, how difficult is that car? Sam said he spotted handling characteristics. He could see during the televised coverage. And has it fallen down to 5th? If only for the fact that it didn't look that good compared to what I thought was a very solid looking Williams. So I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to put Red Bull 5.
Okay.
Which means Williams will be 4.
So it means it comes down to Sam, because it's 1 vote for me for Williams in 5th. It's 1 vote for Red Bull for me in 5th. So Sam, it comes down to you.
I love a hot take like you wouldn't believe, but I just feel like that would be a real fall from grace. I'm going to have to go Williams in pursuit of where I think it is really accurately going to be.
Okay, so based on that, though, that then makes fourth in the pecking order in our overall vote quite simple, and Red Bull then for fourth at the moment. Yeah.
If you two are going Red Bull 4, me Williams,
I think
4,
so.
Also, well, to be fair, at the same time, of course, for those who are watching, or listening, you can, of course, now I guess understand our personal views as well, not just our general. Ian's going very bold with Red Bull fifth and Williams.
I love
4.
it though. I absolutely,
I love it. This is what we're here for. This is the bold predictions.
It could be complete and utter nonsense, and they're going to blow that thought out of the water in Melbourne, and I'm just going to look like a complete idiot.
Okay.
The laps they were in testing, so that's okay. I'll
True. That was pretty impressive.
But again, Red Bull is are we judging Red Bull? Are we judging Max Verstappen in a Red Bull, or are we judging Liam Lawson in a Red Bull?
Max is going to win in Australia. We know it's going to happen.
Yeah, but you take my point that there's differences in some ways in where they kind of will end up.
All I'm going on is what we saw in testing, and it was a struggle in testing. They had their issues with the car, and the quotes. That's all I can go on. In comparison to what I saw from what looked a very solid, well-handled car with the Williams.
Reliable.
And the positivity that you could sense was coming out of that team as well. So don't shoot me down, folks, all you Red Bull, Max Bull fans, Max Verstappen fans out there, which I know you will. You're going to put it in the comments. Oh, you don't know what you're on about. I'm just going on what I'm seeing. That's all.
But also,
everyone's opinion is entitled.
It's also not even. It's not that you're seeing it from afar. You were in the actual paddock as well. So it's an obviously informed opinion. But yeah, I'd go Red Bull fourth. I'm not sure if I believe Mercedes are clear of them, but yeah, we'll see. But
which brings us on to third, and for me, I think third is Mercedes. I'm not too sure where they are. They can maybe be fourth. Who knows? I think Mercedes.
They're not sure where they are.
I don't think that. Oh yeah, who knows?
I'm not sure anyone's
who knows?
Sure
okay, so Mercedes, nice and easy in third. Second, Ferrari. Then another again.
I think the top three is pretty easy, isn't it? McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes is if it's fairly straightforward.
Sealed.
So yeah,
Ferrari 2, McLaren 1, and that is Racing News 365's pecking order looking ahead to the 2025 F1 season. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comment section below if you agree with our pecking order, if you disagree, and obviously what your pecking order is. Then it'd be lovely, as always, to get your thoughts. There's going to be loads of
people disagreeing with me and Red Bull, mate. That's for sure. So.
Let's keep it friendly.
Yeah.
Right. Finally. We need to start our brand new predictors game. I'm worried. This is quite a long episode, but there's been a lot of stuff to cover. And we are, I don't want to say copying, we've been advised to do this by our Dutch colleagues. We're going to be using the Racing News 365.nl predictor game system for .com for 2025. And essentially, here is how it goes. Ahead of each race, we will each predict who we think will qualify in the top 3, who we think will finish the race in the top 5, and we will answer or predict, should I say, a question submitted by a fan. If you correctly predict a driver in the correct position, it's 3 points per driver. If a driver finishes 1 place above or below where you predicted, that gets you 1 point per driver. If you get the special fan question correct, that is 5 points, 1 whole hand's worth of fingers. So, does it all roughly make sense? Roughly? Yeah. 4 fingers and a thumb. Okay, Sam, I see what you're trying to say. Also, something very, very important is for every race, we will need 1 fan to let us know their predictions, because, of course, as well as keeping track of our own scores across the season, we will be keeping a fan total going. 24 races means 24 fans, means by the end of the season, we will have an overall fan score. And we do have a fan for the first race is Yulia, who's also my sister-in-law. So who is a new F1 fan. I'm very impressed.
Contentious start to the season.
It is not, because these predictions from Yulia are very, very different. So just so you guys know, Yulia's fan question is, which driver do we think will make up the most places during the Australian Grand Prix? So I'll give you two a few minutes to think. I'll quickly go through my predictions and Yulia's, which I have. So speaking of myself, I think Lando Norris will qualify on pole, Oscar Piastri in second, Charles Leclerc in third. In the race, I think George Russell will finish 5th, Lewis Hamilton 4th, Piastri third, Leclerc second, and I think Lando Norris will win. In terms of which driver I think will make up the most places, I think Kimi Antonelli. I'm intrigued what he'll be like over one lap.
Nick,
Sam, you can go for the same. You realise this. We have to do this 24 times this year. It is okay.
Yeah, we're going to have some same answers.
We're all going to be very different for every single prediction.
Well, in terms
Nick's top 3 in qualifying is mine as well. I'm going Lando, Oscar,
which is
Charles.
Absolutely fine. In terms of Julia, so the fan believes that it will be Max Verstappen on pole. Maybe Red Bull have got a solution after all. And of course, as we've mentioned in this podcast, Albert Park is very, very different to Bahrain. Who knows? But yeah, Max on pole, Leclerc in second, Russell in third. So maybe McLaren have a bit of a nightmare. In terms of the race, Julia predicts that Carlos Sainz will finish in fifth. A shout out for big old Carlos. Russell fourth, Liam Lawson to claim a maiden podium. Julia's gone bold because that could be where the points are claimed. Charles Leclerc second, and a Max win with Lewis Hamilton to make up the most places. So I like this. I feel like the fans are going to try and be a bit bolder because as we've seen, I mean, we try and play it safe and we still get it horribly wrong. Sam, go on then, give us your predictions, mate.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it affects how we start to vote. And actually, if we start to work out a strategy. But anyway,
this is the fun of it. I say fun. I'm going to lose more hair over it, I think.
I'm so invested already. I'm going to go more grey.
You should see my Excel table.
Oh, that's a good shout.
Really?
I've got a big Excel table already for it. All right, Sam, go on.
Most overtakes, Kimi Antonelli. I think he's going to have some rookie wobbles in qualifying.
I agree.
Qualify low down the order potentially, and put on a bit of a clinic during the race. For qualifying, I think Lando pole. I think Charles second, Lewis Hamilton in third.
Interesting.
In qualifying, and I think in the race, I think fifth will be Max. I think fourth, we're going to have Charles. Third, Oscar. Second, Lewis. And we're going to have Lando Norris, who I forgot his name momentarily, winning the race.
Interesting. So we're going a bit different. Ian, for you then?
Most number of places, Carlos.
Okay.
I'm going to go fifth position, Max, because he always, despite what I've said about Red Bull,
he's that good.
Pecking order.
He's consistent.
Yeah, I can see him being at least doing something at Albert Park. And fourth, I'm going to go Lewis, third Charles, and I'm going to go McLaren 1-2, which I don't think anybody's predicted yet. So I'm going to go Lando, Oscar.
So Lando first, Oscar second, or Oscar first?
No. Lando first, Oscar second.
No home victory. Oh, sorry, Oscar. If you don't win, it's not our fault.
Ferrari 3-4, Max 5. There you go.
I've already forgotten what I voted for.
And of course, it's a good thing I'm going to keep track of it all. And of course, we will go over our results for each race in the following podcast after that Grand Prix. And of course, make sure you're letting us know your ones in the comments below because you can play along and keep track of your own score. Guys, I think that brings it to a wrap. The reason, of course, why we've done our predictions for Australia a week early is because, as I've mentioned, we have got 13-time Formula One race winner David Coulthard on our podcast next Monday. You do not want to miss that. On that note, this has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast from Sam, Ian, and myself. We'll see you later. Bye, guys.
As always, I jumped in too quickly then. Take care, folks.
Thanks for joining us.